Hillforts of West Wales. The Hillforts of prehistoric Wales commanded prominent positions for centuries. In West Wales, Hillforts occupied dramatic landscapes, many dominating windswept hilltops, with some clinging to eroded coastal cliffs or headlands, whilst others stood within dense, silent woodland. Over 1,000 of these great structures survive as ruins, reflecting the spread of innovation and cultural ideas across Britain and the continent. Once believed to be the work of giants or the remnants of Roman castles, their huge earthen banks and terraces indicate dedicated, skillful planning, demanding awkward, arduous construction during the Iron Age. Research in recent decades has developed a more nuanced appreciation of ancient earthworks and hillforts. Environmental analysis and radiocarbon dating suggest these structures were built as a reaction to changing circumstances in the first millennium BC, with some hillforts having indigenous origins in the preceding Bronze Age and even into the Neolithic period. Iron Age Britain had no dominating uniform culture. Instead, separate tribal groupings interacted between themselves. Despite differences between the communities inhabiting Cardigan Bay, material evidence shows they were well connected to the wider cultures and traditions of prehistoric Britain, the Irish Sea, and continental Europe. The idea that hillforts were solely military or defensive is debatable, considering that pre-Roman conflict probably involved competitive displays or occasional raids between rival groups, rather than pitched battles. Thus, bulky ramparts and complex gate structures likely served to impress and intimidate, as weaker defences elsewhere suggest that neither hillforts nor defended farmsteads were designed to withstand sustained attack. Hillfort construction suggests communities joined together, perhaps even for the first time, probably against an escalation of conflict or threats from rival groups or raiding parties. Their presence in the landscape indicate important, complex networks made by visionary leaders and skilled creators. How then were hillforts used? Hillforts span many centuries, their functions and chronologies as diverse as their physical form and topographical position. They probably ranged from large, complex defended villages to seats of family or tribal power. Some may have been political, regional, or ceremonial centres. Lesser settlements in the form of farmsteads may have managed enclosures for corralling stock or providing trading areas for markets and seasonal fairs. Although the names of West Wales's early leaders are lost to time, we can still visit their strongholds and look out over the hills and valleys and coastlands they once knew. We can ponder their allegiances and power struggles, guessing what beliefs united or divided them. Despite their prominence in the Welsh landscape, many aspects of these great prehistoric defended settlements remain a mystery. Archaeologists continue to debate their age, appearance, and purpose.
WA2360, Pen Dinas, Aberystwyth, Ceredigion. A major contour hillfort with two distinct enclosures to the north and south, located on a prominent hilltop overlooking Cardigan Bay. With the estuary of the Avon Ystwyth to the southwest and the Avon Rheidol to the east at Aberystwyth, and linked by a saddle of ground called the Isthmus. There were 4 phases of construction starting in the Middle Iron Age. The first phase was the northern enclosure, then the southern enclosure was added, later reoccupied, and the ramparts remodelled in phase 3. Finally, the enclosed area had additional ramparts constructed across the isthmus, linking both summits, together with a new main gate as phase 4. 12 hut platforms are cut into the hillside in the southern enclosure, mostly around the southern gate. The 19th century Wellington monument was built in the southern enclosure. The site was recently excavated in 2021.
Cardigan Bay's most iconic hillfort sits majestically above the coastal confluence of the Rheidol and Ystwyth rivers. Its strategically advantageous commanding position allowed access to resources from land, mountains and sea. Its inhabitants must have been very prestigious warriors, as Roman maps apparently marked Cardigan Bay as a potential hazard. The legendary sunken lands of Cantra y Gwaelod lie under the sea west of Pen Dinas. Supposedly rich and fertile, this lowland hundred held 16 cities governed by Gwythno Garan, whose palace, Caer Wythno, lay 7 miles from the coast of Aberystwyth. Ceithinin was in charge of the dikes that protected the land from the sea, and was described as a notorious drunkard and carouser. And it was through his negligence that the sea swept through the open floodgates, ruining the land. The church bells of Cantra Gwaelod are said to ring out in times of danger. Between 1933 and 1937, Professor Gaer Fawr from Aberystwyth University excavated Pen Dinas fort, attracting much media attention. His dig revealed 4 major phases of building and redesign, revealing Pen Dinas to be a masterpiece of Iron Age architecture and engineering. The stone-walled Isthmus Gate stood as high as a 2-storey building, crossed by a wooden bridge supported on 4 massive timber posts. 4,680 trees were estimated to have provided the timber to build the towers and walls. Dyfed Archaeological Trust excavated again in 2021 and uncovered hut floors and drainage ditches. Spindle whorls and an amber bead were found, the amber suggesting there were trade connections with the Baltic area of northern Europe. The south enclosure is easily accessible via footpaths, but the northern enclosure is on private land. Pen Dinas was once also known as Castell, after a giant who once dwelt at the fort. It came to pass that Mawr was captured in the Commod of Cyfeiliog, about 12 miles from his own castle, and he was sentenced to death. His enemies allowed him his final request, to blow on his horn 3 times before his death. The first time he blew, his hair and beard fell out, and on the second blast of his horn, so great was the strength and force of the sounding that all his fingers and toenails fell off completely. On the third blast of his horn, the intensity of the force of the sound caused the horn to be broken into small pieces. Mawr's first son, Carmarthen, was hunting with his horse, and his hound heard the sound of his father's horn and lamented over his suffering. He made to rescue his father, and in riding with such haste and swiftness, he tore the head of his hound off its body. He spurred his horse onwards, leaped in one great bound over the Ystwyth River, and attacked his father's captors. In the ensuing battle, Carmarthen was slain. The other sons, Cribyn and Bobagawa, lived in Llanilla and Llanbadenfawr, respectively, and murdered any man who approached their stronghold. They were both killed themselves through cunning by an unnamed warrior in the same night. To summarise, could Mawr perhaps be a memory of a real historical Iron Age chieftain? Or perhaps a medieval prince? Maybe these legends contain some fragments of truth, but they are ancient, and thus Milo's story may be a distortion, having been retold many times throughout the ages. Research into this iconic hill fort is ongoing. In April 2023, Dyfed Archaeological Trust, in partnership with the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, revealed the footings of the northern gateway into the isthmus enclosure and added further knowledge to the area surrounding the gateway. September 2023, excavations revealed terraced Iron Age roundhouse footings, suggesting the Pen Dinas settlement was much more populous than previously thought. Hopefully, this new research will uncover further evidence illuminating Pen Dinas' mysterious past.
02 WA2362 Castell Perthi Mawr, Ceredigion. A multiple enclosure hill fort on the southwest facing spur of an isolated plateau above the Avon Iron to the southwest and the Nanta Drindod to the northwest. Defined by two widely separated banks without ditches. The 2-metre-high inner bank has a quarry ditch inside, counterscarp on the northwest with an inner northwest facing entrance. The outer entrance is set at a re-entrance on the north-northwest and offset from the inner. The eastern bank terminals of both entrances appear to have been expanded or enhanced. Surface evidence of huts and quarry hollows in the interior. Minimal investigations, undated.
The name translates to the Great Hedge Castle. This highly strategic hill fort is positioned 220 metres above the Vale of Iron. An older name is Bolca Castell, meaning Castle of the Pass, suggesting that it commanded an ancient track visible from the northwest entrance of the fort. Castell Perthi Mawr, also known as Castell Kilkennin, is situated on the southwest spur of the Trachrich Mountain, whose name means Three United Hills. 1 mile to the northeast, a group of round cairns lie at Trachrich's highest point. The mountain has legends of giants and fairies, and it has been said that the fairy music can occasionally be heard here, often after closing time. Like Cadair Idris, this lofty elevation was once the special seat or chair of a giant whose grave was one of the round cairns. The spectacular remains of this enclosed hill fort on the Trachrich Mountain feature in folklore regarding a match of quoits between the giants of Cambria. It says, "He of Trachrich is said to have thrown one across St George's Channel to the opposite coast of Ireland, thus winning the contest." The hill fort is on private land, but there are views from the footpath to the north.
WA2363 Penclouth Mawr, Ceredigion. An inland promontory fort located on the end of a prominent east-west spur at the confluence of the Nantusk and the Avon Iron. A substantial curving earthen bank cuts off the promontory to the east. The sides are ploughed down on the north and south, and there are now sharp breaks above the steep slope. It has been suggested that there were an additional 2 or 3 banks, but this is not apparent today. Minimal investigations, undated.
Mawr is another strategically positioned hill fort, commonly known in Welsh as a Pen Y, meaning fort on the headland, a type of station, many of which are spaced a few miles apart along the Vale of Iron. Most feature artificially flattened prominences and huge banks and ditches in defensive patterns, also huge dry stone walls. They were probably fortified farmsteads utilising the surrounding land. Little is left of this fort, having been destroyed by farming over time, but there is a substantial bank and ditch to the eastern higher side, and a solitary dead tree which probably defines the westernmost extremity of the fort's defences. From this high position above Ystrad Iron, the Vale of Iron below, and at least 4 other hill forts can be easily seen on the prominences of the opposite hills. Access near to the hill fort is via a public footpath, but the site itself is on private land.
O4 WA2377 Caer Lifry, Pen y Ceredigion. This is a contour hill fort located on the summit of a northeast-southeast ridge above the Avon Iron to the northeast and its tributary, the Nant y Gaer. The sides have been ploughed down both north and south. There are slight traces of an external ditch and an entrance to the east defined by a bank 45 metres from the eastern bank of the main enclosure. Minimal investigations, undated.
Caer Lifry, Pen y lies along the crest of a ridge-like summit at 220 metres above sea level. A local account asserts that defences were levelled in the late 1990s. Once again, this is a good naturally defended site in a strategic position high above the Vale of Iron, above Ystrad Iron village. The internal area of the fort is ridged with 2 platforms cut in towards the east end of the south side, which may have been house platforms. According to a story written in 1600 called The Giants of Wales and Their Dwellings,
in the land of Abertavy, in Ystrad, a giant called Dithanel Gower once lived, and Castell Dithanel was named after him.
this location is unknown, but could be Caer Lifry, Pen y, for it lies directly across the vale from Castell Perthi Mawr to the northwest and Pen Mawr to the southeast. All of these sites probably date to the Iron Age, strongly suggesting a link between them. Caer Lifry, Pen y, is on private land, but a footpath passes a couple of 100 metres to the north. The Atlas of Hillforts of Britain and Ireland has been produced by archaeologists at the Universities of Edinburgh and Oxford, as well as University College Cork for Ireland. This survey contains over 4,000 archaeological sites in England, the Isle of Man, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and continues to expand as more hillforts are added. The Atlas logs each hillfort with an identity number, preceded by an area code denoting its region in the United Kingdom and Ireland. This system has been used to identify the 20 forts studied in this series, where the letters WA precede all codes for the identification of hillforts situated in Wales. Hillforts of West Wales.
'05. WA 2365 Cribyn Gaer, Caer Maes Mynach, Ceredigion. A contour hill fort located on an isolated and prominent northwest-southeast ridge overlooking Cribyn at the confluence of the Afon Graneth, a tributary of the Afon Tavy, with streams to the northwest and Nant Mynach to the southeast. A good dominant position, defined by a bank and ditch to 5 metres high and 15 metres wide with an entrance to the southeast. Possible annex on the southwest, but unclear of extent. Possible building platform set into the north rampart. Minimal investigations, undated.
The striking location suggests a deliberate positioning in the landscape to communicate a symbol of power. The steep slope on the west side and the bank and ditch running south from the entrance was removed in the 1970s. The name translates to Monk's Field, also the name of nearby Maes Mynach Farm below the settlement and once home of Ceredigion's famous 19th century Welsh-speaking poet Daniel Evans. In the porch of St Hilary's Church in Llanilla, Ceredigion, some 20 miles to the north, is a stone with Celtic interlace. This inscribed stone was possibly part of an early medieval cross shaft, dated from around the 9th century. It was apparently found at a Gaer Maes Mynach in Cribyn. The Maes Mynach stone and another from nearby Cillian are the only examples of pillar stones discovered in Wales, and it is thought that both stones were carved by the same hand. There is no public access. Cribyn Gaer cannot be viewed from any point nearby.
'06. WA 2315 Castell Moeddyn, Ceredigion. This is a small univallate contour hill fort situated on the southern side of a rounded hilltop above the Afon Graneth. Defined by bank and ditch and counterscarp, which is more prominent on the more accessible northern side but reduced to a scarp on the southern side, and the ditch is mostly silted. A possible revetment as the face of the rampart is steep. Simple gap northeast entrance. Minimal investigations, undated.
There exists a giant legend associated with Castell Moeddyn. In the land of Aberteifi, there dwelt Moel Gower, and his abode is still called Castell Moeddyn. The hundred of Moeddyn, a subdivision of the county of Cardiganshire, now Ceredigion, is named after this fortified settlement. The main northeastern gateway shows evidence for original quartz walling, now tumbled in keeping with other Ceredigion Hillfort gateways. Even today in Ceredigion and other parts of southwest Wales, large quartz crystals demarcate property entrances. The pagan Celts believed the quartz warded off evil spirits, while for Christians, quartz stone repelled the devil. Wirt Sykes, in his book British Goblins, published in 1880, wrote, "In Cardiganshire, the tradition respecting an encampment called Moeddyn, which the fairies frequented, is that they were always in green dresses and were never seen there but in the vernal month of May. The site, which is on private land, can be seen via a public footpath 100 metres away."
'07. WA 2347 Dinas Cerdin, Ceredigion. A small univalate contour hill fort located on a knoll in a strong position at the southern end of a very prominent spur at the confluence of the Avon Cerdin to the east and tributaries of the Avon Tavy. Defined by two banks and ditch, silted up and forming a shelf above steep natural slopes on all sides apart from the north, where a third scarp fronts an entrance. There are at least 6 building platforms in the southern interior. Minimal investigations, undated.
At least 6 building platforms lie within the southern part of the enclosure, around a higher natural knoll. The entrance, a simple gap, is a little west of the northern apex of the enclosure. The interior seems undisturbed. This hill fort is one of several forts in Wales known as Dinas, which translates to city. Cerdin refers to the river and a nearby valley. The word Cerdin itself seems to translate to mountain ash, a tree that is abundant along the river valley. The site is on private land, but a good view can be seen via a public footpath on the adjacent hill, some 200 metres away.
'08 WA 2289 Foel Mwnt, Ceredigion. This is a coastal fort located on a rugged west-facing promontory overlooking Cardigan Bay, rising to around 60 metres above the sea. To landward it rises steeply from a saddle where Mwnt Church and the National Trust car park are today. A possible revetment. Second line of rampart at the foot of the slope. Simple entrance gap in bank and ditch on the northern section of the eastern defence. Minimal investigations, undated.
Famous for its small sandy beach, Mwnt is known as one of Ceredigion's hidden gems. It is also one of the finest spots for dolphin, whale and seal spotting. There is a magnificent headland to the northwest of the beach and a medieval chapel actually on the site of a coastal promontory fort. The southwest quarter of the church is believed to have been constructed over a Bronze Age round barrow. Iron Age people fortified the headland for reasons now lost. A stone cross once stood on the summit of the hill, from which the Church of the Holy Cross is thought to have derived its dedication. The hill may feature in a legend which spoke of a large bank of sand said to cover a mass grave. Supposedly, it marks the remains of Flemish invaders encouraged to land by the Welsh, who slaughtered them after a huge battle in 1155 AD. The bank of sand could be under the car park, immediately southwest of the church. The battle associated with this mass burial was commemorated on Mwnt, which in English translates to Red Sunday, the first Sunday of the new year in the Old Julian calendar, or Hen Galan. On this day each year, a mock fight took place, manifesting as an inter-parish knappen, or football match, with the goals set 5 miles apart, being the church towers of Llandyssil and Llanwenog. These contests continued until the early 19th century and had become wild affairs, with many people being killed or injured during the game. So in 1833, the vicar of Llandyssil put a stop to it. Instead, he established a scripture contest between the two parishes, which continues to this day on Mwnt, the first day of the Old Julian calendar. Today, elements of knappen survive in the game of Welsh rugby. Footpaths lead from the car park with steep and sometimes rocky climbs. a study of Hillforts in West Wales. Welsh Iron Age Hillforts were built using different materials from their counterparts in what would later become England. Iron Age people in the east of Britain tended to build larger forts constructed from soft, malleable chalk. Building a hillfort on chalkland would involve scooping out the chalk and moulding it into revetments for palisades to be placed on top. In Wales, a hillfort base and its ramparts were hewn from solid rock. Using stone as a building material, the Iron Age builders constructed dry stone walls and stone revetments topped by a palisade of wood. Why are most hillforts of West Wales usually smaller than their English counterparts? One obvious reason is that chalk is easier to work, but there may be other considerations. West Wales may have contained a small, sparse population, allowing less manpower to spare for such huge undertakings. Building a hillfort presented challenges, not only of quarrying the stones, but moving them across hills and valleys. The Welsh landscape differs entirely from gentle, chalk downland in the east. Wales possesses steep hills and high mountains, separated by deep ravines and heavily wooded valleys, not to mention streams and rivers. A long journey must have been arduous and dangerous in the Iron Age, so building a stone fort could have been especially difficult. Yet, incredibly, stone blocks were quarried and moved around these wild hills to construct hill forts in the most commanding positions. The method for transporting building materials in the Iron Age is a mystery. There is very scant evidence of horsepower or the wheel in this period in West Wales, although a chariot burial has been recently excavated in Pembrokeshire. Sleds have been used until very recent times to transport people and goods. Probably, when levelling an area for a fort's foundations, many displaced stones already on the site would be utilised in the construction of the fort. Considering the challenges of negotiating the landscape, as well as frequently ruthless weather, why go through so much trouble to build a hill fort? In West Wales, around Cardigan Bay, they appear to be defensive structures, strongholds of territorial commanders guarding against invasion. Also, they may have been a welcoming place for visitors, offering protection, a safe place to share news and entertainment, as well as to trade. Their advantageous position in the landscape allowed unfettered observation of traffic from the sea or rivers, making a hill fort a place to share intelligence and gather information about movement. This Welsh coast would have benefited from Irish sea trade routes, as people could arrive from Ireland or the western seaboard of Europe. The discovery of an amber bead shows a connection to Baltic trade. So let's bring on our first hill fort.
'09 WA 1895 Foel Drygarn, Pembrokeshire, Shibemthro. A major rocky contour hill fort located high above the headwaters of the Avon Tarf at the eastern end of the Mynydd Bryseli Hills, in a strategic position to command possible routes. The circuit comprises two widely spaced stone and earth banks, now dilapidated and vegetation covered, with traces of flanking ditches. The inner bank rises 1 metre above the interior and above the ditch, into which it has largely collapsed, masking its outline. Outer bankless, with dry stone wall facing visible on inner and outer face, as well as on the outer face of the inner bank. Set against natural cliffs on the southern side, where no defence was needed. The site is notable for 3 Bronze Age cairns on a domed summit. There is evidence of at least 227 hut platforms in the interior and 42 possible other sites. A survey by researchers from Portsmouth Polytechnic in 1988 provided the first detailed plan. A very stony site under moorland rough grazing, outstanding and well preserved despite fallen stone.
The Golden Road runs along the ridge of the Mynydd Brasili, passing Foel Drygarn. This picturesque walking route links ancient monuments and burial places, cairns and rocky tors, with views reaching as far as Ireland, as well as deep into South Wales and the magnificent northern expanse of Cardigan Bay towards Snowdonia. The Golden Road possibly dates back 5,000 years to Neolithic times, when it may have been one of the hundreds of ridgeways or high trails that avoided dense, dangerous forests or difficult terrain below. This trail could have been part of an important superhighway, where gold mined in the Wicklow Mountains of Ireland travelled as far as Wessex to be traded. With nearly 250 known hut circles, Foel Drygarn must have been a busy, bustling community the size of a small town. The enclosing dry stone walls and the footings of the huts needed huge amounts of stone for building materials, and it makes sense that our Iron Age ancestors quarried the rock from the summit. The three massive cairns of piled-up stones are commonly thought to be important burial structures. They may be up to 1,000 years older than the Iron Age period and the Hillforts surrounding them. The cairns were probably considered very important by the later Iron Age Hillfort builders, as they required a colossal amount of stones for their fortifications, paving and building platforms in the construction of the Hillfort, yet they appear to have left the cairns untouched. Foel Drygarn translates as Bare Hill of Three Cairns. Legend says a hoard of gold lies beneath the flat stone known as Bortha Brenin, which means the king's table. The flat stone must be well hidden, as nobody has been able to find it. In the British Isles, mortar or cement was unknown until Roman times. Thus, most stone structures were built using the dry stone technique, still often used in rural areas today. A wooden framework built into the structure of the fort added strength to the higher walls and towers. Over time, the wood rotted away and the walls crumbled, their stones tumbling down the mountain's steep slopes. Foel Drygarn may have been a settlement in continual use since the Bronze Age or even the Neolithic period. Finally, could the cairns be remains of three collapsed towers or beehive-shaped cairns, as local legend would have it? Foel Drygarn is on open-access land and can be easily reached by footpath.
WA 2127 Pen Y Gaer, Llanabother, Carmarthenshire. Pen Y Gaer is a circular contour hillfort located on a prominent hill, with the Tavy to the west and a stream on the east flowing into the Avon Dr. It is defined by two banks and ditches in the northeast, although the outer ditch is only visible in places and the inner ditch appears to have been disturbed. There's a single bank with no ditch visible elsewhere. The eastern entrance was formerly protected by the incurved banks, but much of this was removed early in the 20th century. It has been badly affected by field boundaries. Minimal investigations, undated.
This small circular contour fort crowns a wide, prominent hill, conical shaped with pasture cover. It overlooks the small Tavy town of Llanabother. The fort itself and the hilltop is bisected with hedges, each quadrant belonging to a different owner. The site is barely recognisable as a Pen Y Gaer Hillfort, and its name has taken on the generic title as its own. Farming and grazing have eroded the southern flanks, but the banks and ditches to the north and east still reveal the profile of the original features. Today, a large pink garden shed is situated in one of the quadrangles. One can imagine that it perhaps sits over an Iron Age chieftain's roundhouse. There is no public access.
11. WA 2258, Blind Mice, Pencarreg, Carmarthenshire. A large contour hill fort located on the prominent summit of a west-facing promontory overlooking the Avon Tavy and Clean Pencarreg from the east. Single bank and ditch, best seen on the eastern side where the bank is up to 1 metre high and 3 metres wide, with a 4 metre wide outer ditch. Possible internal enclosure recorded on aerial photographs of the 1940s, but not now visible on site. No entrance defined. Minimal investigations, undated.
This large defended Iron Age settlement sits on a high promontory overlooking Avon Tavy and Llyn Pencarreg, a lake of glacial origin. A Roman road bisects the lake below the fort, connecting nearby San Helen with the Roman town of Carmarthen. In 1917, near the lake, the head of an iron mace was discovered. Analysis revealed a probable prehistoric origin, even though it was found on the surface of the Roman road. It may have been a votive offering to the lake, rediscovered in Roman times. A possible Roman camp was recently found close by, suggesting that the Romans were present and engaged in subduing the community of this large settlement. There is a public footpath close to the north with some overlooking views.
"12. WA 2129, a Gaer Pencarreg, Carmarthenshire. A fine contour hill fort located in a commanding position with far-reaching views, situated on the summit of a small knoll on Mynwent Pencarreg and at the headwaters of streams to the east and west flowing into the Avon Tavy to the north. A single rampart completes the circuit, around 1.8 to 2 metres high externally, with traces of ditch in places. Simple southeast entrance. Good condition, minimal investigations, undated.
This small, little studded hill fort sits 344 metres up on a knoll upon Mwnt Pencarreg. With only one bank and ditch, it appears to have been a relatively simple fortified settlement, and if it held similar features to other local hill forts, it most likely had a wooden palisade. During the latter part of the Bronze Age, communities established elevated settlements on prominent ridges surrounded by wide-reaching views. Valleys often had a dangerous river at their base and dense shrubs and trees which made travelling dangerous. Britain's wilderness landscape, particularly the west of Wales, contained wild animals such as bears and wolves, not to mention nefarious human raiders. This elevated defensive enclosure probably functioned as a safe home away from predators. There is a public footpath 100 metres to the east side with views. Types of hill fort. Archaeologists have categorised hill forts into two main kinds, the contour and the promontory. A contour hill fort means the fort has been built to wrap its way around the contours of a summit, as seen at Foel, Drygarn. A promontory hill fort refers to a fort that is sited on a protruding knoll of land overlooking the landscape from high above. These can be found overlooking the sea, a confluence of rivers, or dry land. An example would be Foel Mwnt. Lesser known are the hill slope and plateau forts. A hillside fort is protected by a steep side of a mountain or a hill to one side. Plateau forts, situated atop hilltops or plateaus, commanded impressive panoramic views, offering unparalleled control over surrounding areas. an example being Maiden Castle in Dorset. An even lesser known type of fort is called a marsh fort. An example is Bryn Maen Carai, which is situated in low-lying land upon a wedge of slightly higher ground. The earliest hill forts, probably built in the Bronze or Late Neolithic, are described as univalate, meaning that the fort had only one line of ramparts. Over time, some forts were redesigned and a second line of ramparts were added. These forts are described as bivalate, owing to this secondary line of surrounding ramparts. Later forts, built with the more complex construction, are described as multivalate forts, good examples being Maiden Castle and Old Oswestry. These multivalate forts boasted complex gateways into the interior with convoluted ways through the entrance. Access areas seem specifically designed to trap or deter unwanted visitors or aggressive invaders. Passing into the fort, the visitor would advance through a lower level watched by armed guards from a higher level above, their advantageous positions subordinating the incomers. However, most hill forts appear to be a statement of power and territorial ownership as local chieftains chose to build impressive-looking defensive structures. Some Welsh hill forts with a grand facade hide a small univalate fort behind, probably constructed with wattle and daub or the wooden palisade. Perhaps the massive frontal features were intended to trick potential foes coming from a particular direction, as, usually, serious raiders could easily attack the lesser defended rear of such a fort. Hill forts of the Presili Mountains seem to show military characteristics, suggesting that they were designed to repel and defend against more serious incursions. It is possible that the hill forts of Cardigan Bay were strategically placed to guard against invasion from the sea. Marauders such as the Picts or tribes from Ireland, the Mediterranean or North Africa could raid an undefended coast. If these raiders intended to steal people for slavery, it would make sense to offer security to the local inhabitants while displaying a show of strength and defence with an impressive hill fort. So let's bring on our first hill fort.
(13) WA 4344 Bryn Maen Caer, Castell, Ceredigion. Possible marsh fort or defended enclosure located on a river terrace a few metres above the Avon Tavy floodplain. Formerly a subcircular earthwork, the site is now occupied by the village of Castell and the B4343 runs through it. Despite major destruction of the interior, approximately 80% of the circuit bank survives, forming the boundary of modern housing developments. It is possible that the road passing through from north to south may be the site of the original entrances. Excavation found a long history of occupation, possibly Neolithic, certainly early Bronze Age. An older palisaded enclosure was succeeded by a rampart and ditch in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age.
This defended enclosure is unusual, being built on a low ridge adjacent to the Avon Tavy. Also, a housing development infills the enclosure in the form of the village of Cunnan. It is rare for a modern community to live in the very same footprint as our Iron Age ancestors who, in turn, may have replaced a community on this site from the Bronze Age. The B4343 intersects the enclosure following the course of the old Roman road to Carmarthen from San Helen. In a local legend, there was a Welsh saint called Tegewig, whose beauty attracted a local chieftain named Cunnan. This man forcefully abducted her, but she was soon restored. Cunnan paid for his misdeeds by granting lands in Garthbibio and making them free of services forever, which was apparently sanctioned by the Pope. There is no public access, barring the road running through the modern development.
14. WA2309 Caer Cardigan Ceredigion. A small univalate contour hill fort sited on a distinct hill above the Froid Canon Valley and above the Avon Tavy. In a strong position with precipitous surrounding slopes to the north and east, defined by heavily robbed stone wall and ditch, now scree-like, but traces of the original rampart face are still visible. Blocked entrance and fire destroyed on the northeast. 4 semicircular building platforms lie in the interior. Excavations between 1984 and 1989 by St David's University College Lampeter recorded details of the block northeast facing entrance, shown by carbon 14 dating to be between the 4th and 5th centuries BC. They examined an area of the interior with the remains of 2 circular structures, one of which was multi-phase, its sequence interrupted by a 4-post building. Occupation may have extended into the Roman period, with subsequent reuse.
Lampeter University's General Survey in Ceredigion has studied Caer Cardigan over a number of years. A collapsed and burnt gated structure with 6 post holes was found in the northeast corner, along with some fragmented animal bones which rarely survive in this area's acid soil. Sheep and goats' bones outnumbered cattle and pigs and dogs' bones. Cattle may have been rarer and thus a status symbol in the Iron Age. Viewed from above, this fort's tumbled revetments arise from fallen material from its former walls. This fort has an interesting prehistoric context, as it appears to have been associated with ancient field systems enclosed in archaic dry stone walling that occupied the opposite hills. Spindle whorls, similar to those found at Pen Dinas, have been discovered, as have amber and glass beads, among other Iron Age items. A 4-post structure found here may have been a grain store. Dated to between 400 BC and 90 BC, Caer Cardigan may have continued into the Roman period. Cunnan was a legendary chieftain said to be associated with the nearby Bryn Caerau, also known as the Bryn Cunnan Fort, situated within the local parish of Cechlin. The small Froid Cunnan River runs 150 metres below the Caer Cardigan Hillfort. A little way further upstream, Cunnan's grave is said to lie under a massive collapsed standing stone. A Griffith ap Cunnan, the king of Gwynedd, and a Cardigan ap Blethyn, a prince of Powys, became allies fighting Norman incursions during the 11th century. Before the Normans arrived, the many kingdoms of Wales had been in constant warfare with each other, and in legend it is said that the fort of Caer Cardigan once belonged to the King of Cardigan, and it was named Gaer Morris after him. But Cardigan attacked the kingdom of Deheubarth, which today is in the area of Ceredigion, and captured Caer Morris, renaming it Caer Cardigan. After one battle with the Normans, Cardigan and Cunnan were forced to flee to Ireland in a humble skiff. The following year they returned to Wales and reclaimed part of Powys and Ceredigion. We know the Hillfort, being of Iron Age origin, is much older than the medieval period, but with so many name associations there must be some kernel of facts embedded within the legends. There is no public access, but a public footpath runs across to the south, with views and vantage points from across the valley. WA2341 Pen Y Bannau Ceredigion. A narrow, elongated, univalate, partial contour hill fort sited on a prominent, steep-sided spur above the headwaters of the Avon Tavy, above Strata Florida Abbey.
It has a single bank around most of the circuit, apart from at the northern end of the complex, and a strong oblique entrance, which has 2 additional banks up to 4 metres high with corresponding ditches. On aerial photographs, the eastern part of the middle bank is club-ended, and there is an in-turn to the inner bank on the east. Minimal investigations, undated.
This Hillfort is one of several that seems to ring the Cors Caron bog. Sitting on a high outcrop overlooking the lower part of the huge peat bog, Pen Y Bannau was probably built when the bog resembled a lake. Pen Y Bannau also overlooks the medieval ruins of Strata Florida Abbey, 1 kilometre to the east, whose monks probably regarded the hilltop ruins as remains from a pagan past. The monks themselves held wool fairs locally near Fair Ross, 1 kilometre to the north. And 14th century wool was exported from this area through Carmarthen to Europe. The ruins of the old summer homes or havotae of the abbey's shepherds still survive in the mountain landscape. The northern entrance of the fort is regarded as one of the most distinctive and impressive defensive facades in Mid and West Wales, most probably to impress travellers descending from the routeways that traversed the Cambrian mountains. The rest of the fort only had a simple footing for a single palisade or maybe a wicker fence, so an elaborate entrance held importance, a feature shared by many Hillforts in this area. The Hillfort can be accessed via a public footpath, but with a very steep climb.
WA2340 Penafroedd Clwyd Camp Draig Istrad Myrig Ceredigion. A dramatically sited contour hill fort, aligned northeast and located on a very prominent ridge overlooking a shallow valley, which slopes to the Avon Ystwyth on the northwest side, with commanding views across the northern fringes of Cors Caron to the southeast. The western side of the fort is built at the edge of a precipitous cliff, defined by 2 ramparts, but not contiguous, and a possible phased construction is suggested. Occupying a strong position on the hill and incorporating rock outcrops on the southern side, the inner circuit is slighter, with no outer ditch and a few traces of stone walling on the south side. Good traces of stone walling on its outer face, possibility of early medieval or medieval reuse. At least 3 house platforms have been found inside the fort, and many more can be seen on aerial photographs taken in winter conditions. Minimal investigations, undated.
This stark, commanding hill fort sits on top of a peak overlooking Cors Caron to the south, around 2 miles northwest of Pen Y Bannau. The camp stitches were cut deep into the bedrock, and the profile of the fort seems to reflect a northeast and southerly aspect, whilst the west side of the fort is defined by a steep cliff. Many hut circles, suggesting a large community, occur on this monument. The scree falling down the steep west side slopes may be the remains of stone walling. In some places, the walls can still be recognised. In Wales, most hill forts and defended enclosures were built in between 800 BC and the Roman invasion in about 100 AD. and sometimes there is evidence of use or reuse up to 400 AD. Some hill forts show earlier Bronze Age or even late Neolithic use, but the vast majority were constructed during the Iron Age. Pennyfrith Lloyd Camp is not accessible to the public as it is on private land, but there are nearby footpaths with views. Life and death on a hill fort. Most hill forts in West Wales are associated with a natural spring, either within or just outside the site. Over in the east, many hill forts had more distant water sources, although this is uncertain with our incomplete knowledge of the Iron Age landscape. During the Iron Age, for instance, a higher water table could have meant more water in the environment than there is today. Many hill forts of West Wales contain hollows in the ground. These most probably signify the footprint of a building. People must have lived in the forts, even if only occasionally, perhaps in the summertime or in times of perceived danger. There may have been times when hill forts were densely populated on a permanent basis. Some hill forts contain a Bronze Age or Neolithic cairn, suggesting Iron Age builders purposefully protected their ancestors' monuments, as well as constructing a space where those alive could be close to them. Perhaps veneration and religion were associated with the cairns. They probably played a role in tribal stories and oral history passed down through the generations. The Iron Age people may have actually been more aware of their ancestors than in modern times. These ancient sites are likely to have reinforced traditions relating to death and the afterlife, evoking a sense of spirituality. It is also possible that, in times when people feared for their life and liberty, they sought their ancestors' protection beside a cairn. Solid evidence of demarcation around cairns at Foel Hillfort have been shown using LiDAR. A low dry stone wall was constructed around the cairns inside this fort. It marks a boundary, telling us that people recognise the space around the cairns to be different, special, and/or spiritual. Some would like to suggest that this wall indicates ancestor worship, but in truth we can just see a low wall forming a boundary between the cairns and the rest of the space. It could have prevented those unqualified from entering, like wandering animals or inappropriate people, forcing society to respect rules about the cairns. Alternatively, the Iron Age people may have built the wall to contain spirits or ghosts within the cairns after blaming them for unexpected events, mischievous tricks and nightmares. Wherever the truth lies, we can observe that people in the Iron Age respected the cairns, possibly because they provided proof of ancestry, myths or history. People inhabited the hill forts for thousands of years, retelling stories and rebuilding the fort walls. We understand now that many more people frequented these sites in the distant past, and hill forts may have even been crowded. At Pen Dinas, for instance, it has been discovered that the southern enclosure is covered with multiple layers of building foundations. Shapes include round, square, and a variety of polygonal-shaped buildings, some probably intended for animals. Some had pits for food storage and for keeping weapons, as a hoard of beach pebbles slingshots were discovered. The remains of the walls themselves contained an estimated 30% of large beach or river pebbles, which were carried up by some 120 metres to the summit.
17. WA 2337, Castell Grogonion, Ceredigion. Partial contour hillfort sited in a commanding position on steep slopes above the Avon Ystwyth, and a possible route from the Ystwyth to the Avon Tavy. As a result of topography, no ramparts are needed in the south and only one bank in the west. Elsewhere, there are two widely spaced banks with a ditch only on the outer bank. The interior appears to be divided into a series of stepped compartments, the lowest in the northeast, then rising in the west to the highest outcrop point. The last internal area below the outcrop is a steep natural terrace, partly modified on the north and eastern sides. On this last terrace are the remains of three denuded house platforms, confirmed by a topographical and geophysical survey in 2012. Main entrance is to the northeast, with a freestanding walled bastion and a complex annex arrangement. Possible phasing of fort and important post-medieval activity on site.
A track near Brynavon village leads up to the rectangular hill fort, occupying a crag with two powerful ramparts protecting a rocky summit and what appears to be an extensive enclosure to the east. With stunning views of the surrounding countryside, the southern hillside slopes steeply down to a river several hundred feet below. In 2013, there was an investigation for Iron Age metalworking on the northern terrace of the fort. The X-ray technology concluded that lead-glazed pottery from a post-medieval upland cottage settlement had leached into the soil. Castell Grogonion in English means the Fort of the White Pebbles. It probably refers to quartz crystals that are abundant here. Grogonion lead mine was an old rich mine on the steep slopes of the River Ystwyth below the Hillforts settlement. Mining began in the 1790s and the mine reopened again in 1850 for 10 years, with subsequent temporary reopenings until its final closure in the 1920s. There is no public access, but fine views can be gained from a public footpath to the north and from the deep vale of the Ystwyth.
WA 2138, Cloyne, Carmarthenshire. A contour hill fort in a commanding position on the southwest end of an isolated ridge above the Avon Tavy to the northwest, and a stream flowing into the river on the south and east. Defined by scarps above steep natural slopes on the northwest and southeast, with a bank and ditch elsewhere. Median crossbank, around 3 metres high, with a ditch on the southwest side with considerable stone content. Simple southwest facing entrance and possible rock cut entrance on the north, but this may be later. Minimal investigations, undated.
Although not much is known about this hill fort, its close proximity to a Gaer Fawr and a Gaer Fawr at Garn Goch, it must surely mean that all three forts are related. The name Cloyne translates to black bush, suggesting a possible association with blackthorn or hawthorn hedges. Such thorny hedges could have supplemented the defences of some Iron Age hill forts. This hill fort features a lot of tumbled stone, probably from high stone walls. Constructing a hill fort was a monumental task requiring meticulous planning, organisation and coordination of manpower, besides utilising a considerable amount of resources. In order to construct the walls, a survey of the mountain was needed to provide suitable stable footings. Stone for the walls appears to have been quarried from the mountain peaks, often reshaping them to make a level, livable space inside the fort. Straight lengths of wood were used to create a framework for stone building, such as the dry stone walls, towers and hut footings. The original fort walls could be up to 5 metres high and were often wide enough to feature a walkway along the top, allowing access for guards and their weapons. In Iron Age Britain, the slingshot was a common weapon, and warriors were taught to use it with devastating accuracy from an early age. There is no public access, but views can be seen from nearby Gaer Fawr.
(19) WA 2140 a Gaer Fawr, Garn Goch, Llangadog, Carmarthenshire. A contour hill fort located in a commanding summit position on a small knoll, part of the sandstone Garn Goch Ridge, overlooking and commanding the Towie Valley northeast of Llandailo and opposite the confluence of the Afon Towie and Afon Dillais. A rather weak main dry stone wall defines the site, with a second wall on the inner western side of the main wall and of laid stone slabs of different construction. No ditch. Outturned east-facing entrance opens onto a walled trackway descending into the hollow below a Gaer Fawr, 150 metres to the east. Minimal investigations, undated.
The Garn Goch Hillforts are on common land, situated within the Brecon Beacons National Park, and it is impossible to discuss one without the other, as they seem to have been related. Garn Goch, meaning Red Cairn, consists of a Gaer Fawr, meaning the large fort, and its little sister, a Gaer Fawr, the little fort. This site, the largest hill fort in South Wales, consists of a rough oval line of stones, stretching for over a mile, and with its northern extension spreads to nearly 50 acres. A Gaer Fawr, the smaller fort, sits in the shadow of its much larger neighbour and appears to be incomplete, perhaps abandoned during a rebuilding phase. A report published in 1917 suggested that there may have been a single roundhouse on the site, but little evidence survives.
A Gaer Fawr, Garn Goch, Llangadog, Carmarthenshire. A very large contour hill fort located in a dominating position on the western part of the sandstone Garn Goch Ridge, overlooking and commanding the Towie Valley northeast of Llandailo, opposite the confluence of the Afon Towie and the Afon Dillais. At 11 hectares, it is the largest hill fort in southwest Wales. A massive, now fallen, stone wall with an additional stone rampart to the northwest surrounds the hilltop. To the west, the main rampart is 6.5 metres high and 25 metres wide, though less elsewhere and up to 1.5 metres high. Some stonework survives to the west. The outer wall to the north branches out to form an annex, and aerial photographs indicate it once continued east to connect with the northeast angle of the main fort. no ditch. At least 8 gateways have been identified, all lined with upright slabs, probably original and possibly roofed with lintels. There is a large Bronze Age or Neolithic cairn in the interior. Minimal investigations, undated.
The Gaer Fawr spreads over 11 hectares and has some interesting features. A large walled annex bolted onto the northern wall contains a huge Neolithic cairn, and the remains of a large pool survives as a wet boggy area in the middle of the site. 2 rectangular impressions nearby are assumed to be the remains of medieval structures, although dating is uncertain. The outer collapsed wall is over 1,700 metres long, approximately a mile in circumference. It appears that sections of the tumbled wall would once have been massive, with a huge main rampart to the west. One roundhouse platform measuring 14 feet in diameter has also been identified, as well as a solitary standing stone situated near the south wall. Many questions persist as to the exact purpose of these hill forts. For instance, were these sites really defensive structures? Were they permanently occupied towns and centres of trade, or rather were they places of pilgrimage for religion and ritual? They may have served several functions, having different significance to different people. Only a small handful of these 20 hill forts have been properly surveyed. Minimal archaeological investigation shows aerial and old map surveys which do not provide dates. So the Garn Goch hill forts are assumed to date from the Iron Age, circa 2,500 years ago, but neither of them have provided any contemporary dating evidence, and, as with many other similar forts in Wales, dates are uncertain. Iron Age hill forts that were often situated in close proximity to Neolithic cairns suggest that Iron Age people wanted to live near to their ancestors' burial sites. However, this may only be a partial explanation. The question remains whether some of these forts actually date back to a much earlier period. Although Garn Goch is officially identified as an Iron Age hill fort, this interpretation is challenged by local resident and historian Martin Price, who offers an intriguing alternative for its origins. He presents evidence to suggest this hill fort is perhaps up to 3,000 years older than is currently thought, and its purpose was religious rather than military. Investigating how Garn Goch became identified as an Iron Age fort, Martin discovered that nearly 50 years ago, A.H.A. Hogg, the undisputed expert on Welsh Iron Age forts, wrote a short report describing Garn Goch as puzzling, anomalous, and impossible to prove. Evidently, the expert was not convinced. Martin's observations brought him to the conclusion that Garn Goch resembles an early religious construction more than a military one. He considered other ages for Garn Goch in prehistory, and the Neolithic came into focus. Neolithic ancestral worship appears to associate stone with death, and there are many examples of Neolithic sacred spaces in South Wales surrounded by stones. Focusing on Garn Goch's long cairn, Martin demonstrates that it is not unique, but belongs to a series of long cairns stretching to the Cotswolds. Excavations have confirmed that these cairns are definitively Neolithic. If, as Martin postulates, Garn Goch's purpose was religious, it may represent a major Neolithic ritual and festival site, its large size capable of accommodating thousands of visitors or pilgrims. It may seem unrealistic that large amounts of people once gathered in the middle of nowhere, but Professor Mike Parker Pearson's investigation into Neolithic history reveals further insight. In his 2021 TV broadcast called The Lost Circle Revealed, Parker Pearson demonstrated that some of the blue stones found at Stonehenge Stone Circle were quarried in Pembrokeshire on the northern Presili Hills, adding that there is no doubt that Pembrokeshire was one of the great religious and political centres of Neolithic Britain. Thus, according to Martin, it is absolutely plausible that thousands of people once travelled long distances to South Wales and Garn Goch was not an isolated site in the middle of nowhere. Being positioned on the ridgeway, it must have been a camino to one of the most sacred sites in Neolithic Britain. It was most probably a destination in its own right, as well as being a way station to Pembrokeshire. Garn Goch, perhaps the largest ancient stone monument in Britain, deserves thorough research. Cadw recognises this site to be of prehistoric importance, with remains worth excavating. And Dyfed Archaeological Trust is now committed to excavation. The question needs answering: is Garn Goch merely one of nearly 700 Iron Age Hillforts in Wales? Or is it a large and unique Neolithic religious site that Wales should be proud of? Martin's investigations seem convincing. Perhaps he is right. Maybe Garn Goch evolved to become an Iron Age Hillfort. Only serious archaeology can provide indisputable evidence, and Martin says his next task is to try and generate funding for archaeological investigation. For further information about this fascinating site, you can visit the dedicated website at garngoch.org.
Unveiling the mysteries of Garn Goch and the Neolithic context. Can Garn Goch be compared to any other Neolithic site in the area? Evidence exists that several Hillforts have origins in the Bronze Age and even the Neolithic period, so it is worth examining Martin's hypothesis regarding the exceptionally early construction date of 3000 to 3600 BCE for Gaer Fawr at Garn Goch. Even if built over an earlier settlement, Gaer Fawr's construction predates the massive Neolithic enclosure at Hindwell, situated in the Walton Basin, a mountain valley in East Wales. Hindwell is dated to around 2700 BCE, a few hundred years later than Gaer Fawr, and perhaps could be considered a northern outpost of the Cotswold group of Long Barrows. It was probably a 3 days' walk between these two sites. Some of these Neolithic enclosures differ significantly in that Gaer Fawr was built of stone and situated atop of a promontory, while Hindwell, in a valley bottom, was constructed of wood. Construction differences may be explained by Mike Parker Pearson's proposal that sites constructed with wood represented sanctuaries of the living, while stone-built enclosures represented the ancestors. Hindwell is comparable in size to Gaer Fawr. At Hindwell, an immense wooden palisade consisting of massive oak posts required much effort and investment to build. Yet the smaller entrances indicate controlled access, suggesting a ceremonial site for ritual or religious purposes, rather than for defence. Other similarities between Garn Goch and Hindwell seem to be the inclusion of large pools once situated within both enclosures. Also, both enclosures appear to have once been associated with nearby springs and watercourses. This connection with water may suggest a key feature, possibly for a ritualised purpose. Like Gaer Fawr, Hindwell's Bronze Age descendants continued to occupy the area. Bronze Age people at Hindwell built 2 round barrows within the area of the palisade and many more nearby. Later, in the Iron Age, folk moved away from the valley floor and onto nearby promontories overlooking the former palisade. Perhaps they relocated to the Bertha Bank Hillfort a mile to the east or other nearby sites. The Romans regarded the significance of both Hindwell and Garn Goch to their local area, building roads and a fort on Hindwell and near Garn Goch in the valley below. Later still, medieval castles were constructed nearby, as in the case of Garn Goch. 2 Motte and Bailey castles built by the Normans were also built nearby to Hindwell. Furthermore, the Walton Basin in which Hindwell is situated has several other large enclosures nearby with other tumuli and 2 cursus monuments in the vicinity. In comparison, Garn Goch has a cluster of 3 enclosures with extensions and also hosts large Neolithic and Bronze Age cairns. Choosing to position Iron Age enclosures at high windswept locations, often lacking water sources, is also puzzling. The climate may have been more favourable than at present, but there are other reasons to consider. Valleys in an unmanaged landscape may have seen unpredictable flooding and harboured dangerous animals in dense vegetation, as well as waterborne diseases such as malaria. Hillforts could have provided safety for both livestock and vulnerable people against the potential threat of predators and raiders, and a lofty position would also definitely have allowed some monitoring of the surrounding area. Most Welsh hillforts seem to have access to water. Yet this may not be true for some located in the south and east of Britain. Some of these forts may have been temporary or seasonal, used by herders during specific periods. Perhaps over time the water table decreased, or there was a reliance on carrying water from nearby valleys. Rainwater collection through buckets and pits provide another potential solution. Ultimately, the true purpose of these iconic structures remains a mystery. They could have served various functions. For example, coastal forts could offer additional security against raiders. The clustered housing, identified from LiDAR studies, may indicate the need for safety, expanding families or close community. Furthermore, the clustered roundhouses within these settlements likely maximised daylight, an advantage for drying thatched roofs and maintaining hygienic conditions. With over 4,000 of these ancient sentinels scattered across Britain, they represent the ingenuity and legacy of our ancestors. However, the reasons behind their construction and use remains the subject of exploration and debate.